the long-awaited sequel to the fan-favorite 2012 Crusader Kings 2, Crusader Kings 3 had very large shoes to fill from the outset. This medieval grand strategy game has you take control of either a historical or custom dynasty, and what your goals are and where you go from there is mostly left up to you, whether that be the restoration of the Roman Empire, the formation of the British Empire, conquering the entire map in the name of Great Father Odin, or something in between, like for example forming Austria-Hungary 600 years earlier, plug. In-game you grow the power and influence of your dynasty, by martial might, marriage or intrigue. Above all, Crusader Kings 3 shines if you're able to suspend your disbelief for a bit, and deny the temptation to save scum, role-playing the hand that you get dealt. Crusader Kings 3 brought with it an overhaul of most of Crusader Kings 2's systems, and for the most part this has been a net positive for the game. The old focus mechanic is replaced by a new lifestyle system that comes with perk trees to progress through a character's lifespan. As with all perk trees, inevitably some will be more powerful than others. For the most part, in my experience, I managed to find a use for most of the perks in the lifestyle trees, but notably all three of the stewardship trees felt very underwhelming, especially when you compare it to the very strong trees, like the scholarship tree that has sanctioned loopholes in it that allows you to purchase claims on anything, including empire level titles, or the prestige printing chivalry tree, when combined with Praetorian Guard from one of the diplomacy trees. This isn't a huge issue as the game is predominantly a single player game, and the balance isn't too out of whack. Overall, the lifestyle system is a welcome improvement. Military-wise, the game works mostly the same as it did in CK2, with the most significant changes being on levies and men-at-arms. I like how there are now more determining factors as to whether you win a battle or not, with a more clear men-at-arms counter system, and improved knights in place of the commanders from CK2. With the graphical improvements on the map, it's also easier to see and make use of terrain advantages. I will say I do miss the standing retinue from CK2. Having a high-quality standing army was useful on occasion, because they could be split and stationed in parts of the Empire where you would expect trouble. It's petty, but the forward planning made me feel clever. This isn't really a problem in CK3 though, as armies are now raised by placing flags anywhere in your empire, and all of your levies and men-at-arms will raise at that flag, instead of at their respective cities, and then bunch up like in CK2. For those who prefer cloak and dagger, intrigue is greatly improved in CK3, with the new hook system. Hooks are pieces of information you can gather or falsify on others and use against them. Good intrigue characters can, by using hooks, achieve a lot more than in the past. Intrigue remains as addictively good as it was in the first game. It's still an incredible thrill when a multifaceted intrigue plot comes together with one final murder. On the flip side, it is a bit obvious when you are the target of an assassination plot. Somehow my dynasty has the greatest collection of colorful soft carpets in Europe. But I digress. Finally, learning has become more important than ever, along with a large expansion on the number of cultures on the map, and an expansion on the scope of the map as a whole, stretching further south into Saharan Africa and east into modern-day Myanmar. Every culture now has a tech progression tree, named Cultural Fascination. The fascination is chosen by the strongest military member of the culture, and the speed of the research is dependent on that leader's learning skill. The Cultural Fascination system is a bit of a sour double-edged sword for me, because they decided to lock some very important things behind it, like primogeniture law, as well as all significant infrastructure upgrades. On the one hand, I've had to plan some very interesting machinations in the absence of primogeniture in order to keep the kingdom and the dynasty together. But on the other hand, especially if you're playing a smaller ruler, your cultural head will always seemingly choose to waste 30 years researching horseshoes. Council functions have become more competitive with each other in CK3, seeing as how they switched some of them from councillor to councillor to make them more competitive than they used to be. Things like Fabricate Claim is now on the Court Chaplain, where before it was on the Chancellor. This creates a bit more of a decision to be made, where previously there wasn't really one. Previously most councillors only had one or arguably two good functions. Gone are the days of title laws. Vassal contracts are a bit of a subjective change to me. I see it as a better system for the game as a whole, but it does mean that certain classic tricks from Crusader Kings 2 can't work anymore, such as shuffling your primary title outside of your liege's de jure title to basically make yourself immune to all of your liege lord's laws. Overall, the vassal contracts are a good improvement though, and as I said, I think it's an improvement for the game as a whole. It allows for more individuality when you customize your vassals' contracts, instead of having to have a one-size-fits-all law for all of your vassals. It should also be said that you can customize your contract with your liege. You can not only customize contracts with your vassals, and you can use hooks to manipulate this to your benefit. A small complaint about vassals is that I've noticed that the vassals will often just sit on their hands with the territory that they're given, They won't do any upgrades until you get the ball rolling for them. It's moderately annoying when a vassal has had a piece of land for 50 years and done absolutely nothing with it. Finally, notable by their absence are the minor titles from Crusader Kings 2. I miss appointing things like Designated Regent, Cupbearer for your children, the Court Tutor so you don't have to micromanage that so much, and of course the Court Jester for that one person you hate. Minor cultural titles have also been left out, like the plethora of Byzantine titles, as well as the Roman and Norse titles. I hope they'll make a return in the future. They were fun little pieces of flavor to assign to the people in your court. Tying every other system together is the new omnipresent stress system. A great addition to the game, you gain stress for acting against your character's personality, and by engaging in stressful activities. This encourages role-playing to your character's strengths within their personality. An honest character will gain stress from intrigue, and a greedy character will gain stress by being profligate. Most characters who aren't a recluse can reduce stress by attending things such as banquets and hunts. You gain significant penalties for going above stress thresholds, so it's in your benefit to manage your stress as best as possible. The system does have the potential to screw you a bit though, with contradictory educations and personalities. In the mockumentary that I made, the first ruler of Austria, Duke Ernst, was a level 2 intrigue education, on top of being very honest, creating a nightmare of stress that I had to deal with throughout his life. Religion in Crusader Kings 3 is an incredible improvement from Crusader Kings 2. There's been a huge expansion on both the quantity and quality of religions. You now also have the ability to reform any religion, or form any religion of your choice. You can change their doctrines, their tenets, and through that change all of their religious laws, and through that it affects what they consider to be virtues and what they consider to be vices. The system creates an enormous range of possibilities, and is an excellent addition. Each religion also now has a fervor stat. Fervor is what governs what that religion can do, and how into it its followers are. It helps stop snowballing. Common thing in Crusader Kings 2 was that Catholicism would snowball so far out of control, because it was relatively easy for them to stomp out any heresies, and great holy wars could be waged frequently. Fervor helps reduce the frequency of great holy wars, and it also helps heresies take root, helping keep the larger religions in check. As before, you can fully customize your house and dynasty, including their name, crest, and motto. There's also a cool new system under dynasties, where people who are not the dynastic head of the main house can create new houses, and the new houses will share emblems from the original dynasty and something new, so you can always tell which part of the major dynasty they're part of. New is a system of legacy perks that applies to all members of the dynasty once unlocked. These are unlocked with renown. You gather renown through the living members of your dynasty. More renown for more power, so an emperor will generate a lot more renown than a king, who will generate a lot more renown than a duke. The perks are a real mixed bag though, with some of them being very useful, such as basically everything in the glory and blood trees, and others being fairly useless, like the warfare and law trees, as well as all the ones that have a benefit to your education. I suspect it's mostly because the blood tree, for example, is basically multiplicative throughout your entire dynasty. It is only ever a good thing, whereas the other ones are only situationally useful. If anything can be said about CK2, it's that graphically it's not aged very well, and it certainly looks its age. CK3 has a very clean modern UI that, depending on the zoom distance, changes the information that it shows you. For the majority of the time, the map showed me the information that I wanted to see. The game control is also nice and responsive, with it breaking the map elements into smaller segments as you click on them instead of having to do it through menu buttons. It's a more intuitive way to control the map, and it feels a lot better than individual toggle buttons. Furthermore, the switch to 3D models has been successful for Paradox, and the dynamic character aging and offspring phenotype generation works very well. The AI, especially when they're your ally, and doubly so in Holy Wars and Great Holy Wars, really needs a bit of work. I found that they almost never bunched up properly, and they got wiped out bit by bit in small stacks by the defenders. It gets to the point where I'm confident to say that unless you can personally carry a Holy War, or a Great Holy War, it's very likely that you'll lose. As the aggressor, the frequency of peasant uprisings under certain conditions can be irritating as well. They just seem to happen a bit too much, and there's nothing that the peasants are afraid of. This is especially irritating in larger empires. When the peasants rise up in one of your vassal's territory, the vassal will simply sit on their hands and expect you to deal with it. This is despite the fact that if the peasant uprising wins, they win their independence not only from you, but from the vassal as well. meaning that you basically have to stop whatever you're doing or hire some mercenaries to take out the peasant uprisings as they come along, which, as previously established, happens frequently, until you can get their religion and culture under control. The AI is also not overly aggressive, with most wars being wars of opportunity for small claims. This may be in part due to how many alliances are in circulation, with each applicable marriage in Crusader Kings 3 granting an alliance, where before alliances had to be negotiated individually. It's more historically accurate, and it creates for some fun. Well, he dragged me into this, and damn near allows for the kind of conditions that can trigger a world war. It'd be a disservice of me not to mention the soundtrack. The game has an excellent set of period-accurate music. It lacks some of my all-time favorites, such as Komnenos and the Byzantine Empire from Crusader Kings 2, but the soundtrack is excellent nonetheless. With Crusader Kings 3, Paradox has also decided to now include combat music that triggers every time you declare war, regardless of how small that war happens to be. The combat music can get a bit annoying, and especially as you become a continental empire, having the dramatic combat music play for a small one-county claim war feels at least a little bit disingenuous, if not a bit eye-rolly. Crusader Kings 3 is a fantastic sequel to Crusader Kings 2, and improves in nearly all the areas where it counts. It's pertinent to remember that all comparisons made to Crusader Kings 2 is with all of its expansions, and throughout this review I did refrain from bringing up things that was added in Crusader Kings 2 expansions, missing from Crusader Kings 3, like republics, societies, timed plague events, and smaller things like viceroyalty. As it stands, the game is in a fantastic state, and I'm very optimistic for whatever Paradox decides to bring out next. I suspect that, like a fine wine, Crusader Kings 3 will only get better with time, but that's enough for me. Crusader Kings 3 is available for $50 on Steam or the Microsoft Store, and it's also included as part of the Xbox Game Pass for PC subscription. I've been John. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Farewell.